Guys, just before we get started, if you're loving the podcast, can you please go leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and please make sure that you subscribe on whatever channel that you listen to us on. It helps us out dramatically.
If you can't tell me in one sentence what problem your product will solve, it's probably not going to work. That's so much more important than what's my ROAS in Facebook or return on ad spend in Facebook. That's the sum of many parts. Some of those parts are great product, great, branding, great community. All of that sort of interesting stuff drives ROAS. So to stick a product online, pump a bit of money into Facebook, those days are gone.
Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very excited for this one. I think we were obviously talking a little bit before we started recording, but talking about ecom and it, we're in the golden era. And I think something we want to talk about a little bit later is just what happened in 2020, and a bit of a boom. And there's been some people that I've interviewed, previously that have gone through that boom and their business is growing. And so I think there's some interesting conversations to have around that. But all in all, just really excited to chat.
Yeah, cool, mate. That's what a time. The last couple of years, I started in this game in about 2007, and back in that period, it was more about the GFC and things like that. And then obviously COVID hit, and what the hell happened? Everything went chaotic. We all thought we were closing shop. And then quite the opposite happened and it went bananas.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. I think, we probably won't realise how crazy it was. Like, we still look back and go, that was crazy. But I think in 5 to 10 years' time, especially with all the emerging technologies and what's going to happen, we're just going to look back and go, wow.
That 5 to 10 years' time thing's interesting because, e-commerce is still 20%, only 20% of traditional retail. So the idea that in 10 years... or 15 years, like I could start an e-commerce business now or last year or whatever, in 10 or 15 years, I'll be considered as one of the absolute pioneers. And that's what I love about it. Like, it's not too late. You can get in there, have a crack and still be looked, with the perspective of time, looked at as an early adopter. So there's not too many industries that can say that. And that's one of the reasons I love it.
Even from a business perspective as well, just like on top of that, it is still so early and you kind of go, oh, well, I missed the boom. And it's like, no, we're still in the boom. And if anything, it's probably going to mature now and you'll see it becoming, say, maybe a larger percentage of business, relative to individual companies. And
I think it has to.
Yeah.
And that's right. Like, you missed the boom, but the boom's going. Like, we were already growing in e-commerce. I say the industry was already growing. It was just accelerated. Now, has it declined? Yeah, it has declined from where it was, but it's just back to where it was going, which was a pretty good space anyway. So it's absolutely a nice, a nice ride to be a part of, and the future's still looking pretty rosy, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to start off just by, I guess, tapping into your journey a little bit and how it started and to kind of fast forward now to where it is now.
Yeah, cool. Well, I've been doing this a long time. So I left school and didn't really know what I wanted to do. As I said to you earlier, I wasn't great at school. I was pretty, my upbringing was, I was raised by a single mom on a disability pension, me and my brother, and it wasn't easy. And we weren't interested in school or future or any of those things. And I kind of never had that push to say, Paul, do this at uni or do that. I just was living day to day. And so I took a job in a logistics company in customer service. And then I started having this idea that I wanted to do my own thing. So I started a footwear company of all things, a men's footwear business. It was called Antoine and Stanley. And I did that for a good 10 years. And it was pretty good. I was a wholesaler initially. I sold to David Jones and ASOS, and I was exporting all over the world and selling to just about all the stores you could think of. But I was stuck in a bit of a cash cycle, a negative cash cycle, where I was having to stump up a lot of cash as a then 23, 24-year-old, cash I didn't have access to. And then I was finding these wholesale accounts were coming in asking for 60% margins, 90-day payment terms, and I was, naive, just thinking, I'm in DJs, bugger it, let's do it. And those sorts of deals can send a business bust. and I quickly learned that. So then I opened a few retail stores. I've had 5 or 6 retail stores over the years, including, in Westfields and a lot of the major centres. And I didn't really find my home there. I could do it, but I couldn't find the aha moment where it's like, I can do this better than everyone else. I didn't have that. So then I in 2007, I had a crack at an online store, and it was built on Magento at that point, and started making a few sales. And selling shoes online is not necessarily something I'd advise. Sizes and things like that make it pretty hard. But I started getting a few sales, and it wasn't big, but I was like, I'm getting paid straight away, and I'm making a good margin on it. And that was something that I enjoyed. And I said, okay, well, I'll take that money, and then I'll buy a bit more stock, and then I'll broaden the range, and then, so just reinvesting it. And then I started listing on eBay. Back in those days, eBay had something called the Fashion Gallery. I was selling shoes and other products, lapel pins for men. I was selling bucket loads of stuff on eBay. And then I was trying Groupon and Catch of the Day. You name it, I tried it. I just loved this marketplace concept as well. And so when I sold my business, I went to on to become the head of operations at a company called Shopify. And Shopify went through a great period of time, sort of 30 mil to 80 mil in a couple of years, and that was a really good time for me. Moved on to become the CEO of a company called The Horse, which does watches, and then got into this advisory work. So I advise, Aussie retailers. Oz Hair and Beauty were one of my clients. G'd Up Clothing is a streetwear brand.
Yeah.
Baby Boo Fashion, a women's brand. I've got Drummer Boy, non-alcoholic spirits. So I've got heaps across, good retailers across a different cross-section of verticals, I guess. And then I sort of found a bit of a passion. A lot of newbies were asking me, how do you do this in e-commerce? Or I've built this store, or I've, bought some product off Alibaba, and I was sort of just struck by how many mistakes were being made, and I'd made those same mistakes. And how much money that these people were investing that's just wasted. So I decided to, it didn't make sense for me to charge people. Those sort of startups shouldn't be paying people like me. So I decided to write these Shopify for Dummies and Selling Online for Dummies books, and then imminently learn ecommerce.com.au, which is, again, another training platform for newbies. So I'm sort of found a bit of a passion doing that. And then on the side, I've invested in 3 businesses. I try and do two Aussie ecom businesses a year, and I'm also an advisory board member of the National Online Retail Association. So I try and do a little bit of stuff to, give back to the ecom community as well.
I find it really interesting. You kind of, when you talk to people who've been in e-commerce for a long time, and you kind of hear where they've come from, a lot of it came from that curiosity kind of in the early days. And you are talking that 10 years ago, and you're kind of hearing about the stories about selling on eBay at the very beginning, and kind of, building businesses, in the early days. How much of, because obviously it's a lot easier right now, right? Like in terms of, I'm guessing, in 2007, it would have been a lot more difficult to get started, and obviously the softwares weren't up to date. But how much of kind of where you are now, and the things you're doing now, and the knowledge you have now has come from, say, that curiosity that you had in the early days, and kind of working in that time? Just
about all of it, so when I'm working with a retailer, I always say, I'm a cricket fan, right? I love sport. Anyway, Richie Benaud used to say to his fellow commentators, don't say anything unless it adds value to the situation. And my advice is only based on my experience. If I haven't seen it, if I don't know it, I'll just say that. I'm not going to give you a random opinion. And I've been lucky enough to forge these experiences over the last 10, 15 years. And then, obviously with my other clients, I see things working with one that I can apply to another. But absolutely, I think that's what I try and do, is be raw about it. And I've got no problem at all telling a business you're going to fail. No problem at all. Because I've failed. Many of us have. Many of these businesses out there are failing. They just don't tell you.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to be honest about those experiences. And a lot of my experiences, as you say, it was hard in 2007 to do e-commerce. You know, I built a horrible website. I had to get a development agency in India and then moved on to another one, and they butchered the site, and it was really hard. And yeah, we've got Shopify now and other good platforms as well, BigCommerce and so on. But yeah, Shopify is the one I've written the book about. But you can honestly, 14 days, in 2 days, you could have the bones of a pretty decent site. So the opportunity, I guess, the barriers to entry have lowered. But having said that, other things have gotten harder. You know, but I was speaking today to somebody who was lamenting the fact that 5-6 years ago, you could put $1 into Facebook ads and pull 100 out. Well, that's all done and dusted. So yes, it's easy to build a site. It's probably harder to scale it. I reckon that's the difference.
It's interesting that you say that. Like, I think media is really a fascinating space in regards to, say, what you're just talking about then. You know, the idea that companies are now going to turn to media to try to get distribution built into their company. And that's obviously what social media, you know, it kind of, as that starts to you know, move forward, it's interesting that comment that you made, because obviously you said back in the day, in the early days of Facebook, it was wild, some of the returns that you could generate, and we're just not there. You know, who knows what will happen with TikTok? It's an interesting space, but I think I find that very, very interesting.
Well, that's a good example of how brands have got to keep evolving. Now, you know, TikTok, a lot of businesses out there are starting to pull up to 45% of their Facebook spend and put it into TikTok. But if I check your Google Analytics, I'm going to see a conversion rate of less than 1%. That doesn't mean it's not working though. It's trial and error and looking at incremental revenue and not just looking at the channel in isolation. But yeah, it's a lot harder. And I'd caution any startup particularly listening to this. I mean, you got to go into a new business with the ambition that more than 50% of your traffic has to come from free or organic sources. If your strategy is paid media, I tell you, you fail. You'll fail because it's too hard. No startup's going to go in there selling T-shirts, mixing it with the Iconic or mixing it with, Universal Store or whatever. Forget about it. You know. So you've got to really be smarter than ever before, and I think it comes back to your product. And I always say, if you can't tell me in one sentence what problem your product will solve, it's probably not going to work. But, you know, you have that aha moment when you find your product. That's so much more important than, like, you know, what's my ROAS in Facebook, or ROAS in Facebook and in return on ad spend in Facebook. That's the sum of many parts. Some of those parts are great product, great, branding, great community. All of that sort of interesting stuff drives ROAS. So to stick a product online, pump a bit of money into Facebook, I mean, those days are gone.
I want to go back to something you said about scaling out the business, and you talked about only being reliant on, paid advertising as a startup, and talk, because I understand it, but talk about the relationship between those two things, because obviously in a startup you're not buying lots of the product. The amount of product that you're bringing in, the quantities, your margins aren't going to be there. But then obviously Facebook and the advertising space, it's not as cheap as what it once was. So the idea of, and I'd love for you to talk about it, the idea of that relationship between those two kind of moving parts.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great topic to discuss. And I'm going to talk to my rule, which I have in the books. It's my 50-30-20 rule. So when you're going into a new business in e-commerce, you've got to be aiming for a 50% gross margin. So, my definition of gross margin is the landed cost of the goods plus, merchant fees, and let's say your outbound, your courier cost, your cost to deliver the parcel. And GST is never in these equations. So you've got to be starting with a 50% gross margin after those costs. You've got to aim to spend 30% or less in running the business. So your operating expenses, which by that I mean your wages, your rent, your marketing, all those sorts of things. And that'll leave you with a 20% net profit. And that's a good benchmark for e-commerce businesses, big and small, to aim for. So that comes back to, all right, that's probably going to leave you with maximum 15% to spend on Facebook. And so I'm talking about 15% of your revenue to spend on Facebook and Instagram. So that's enough for a good product. If you're finding that you're needing to spend more than that, you're probably not getting the cut through in your product. But just going back a step, what that really means is one, you mentioned margin. I would delay my launch until my margins are there, because there are many businesses that I've seen who start up or $50 million a year who are operating on 40% margins in the hope that scale will fix margin. Scale never fixes margin. They're variable costs that go up with revenue. And I would always just say, just go back to the drawing board, delay your start until you got your margin. Your margin is your wiggle room. The better your margin, you can afford to spend a bit more on Facebook and stuff. Yeah. And then as well as paid media, that relationship, we need to detach ourselves from that a little bit. And, if you are a startup, for instance, the hype phase, what I'd call the hype phase, is crucial. Think about a Kickstarter campaign or an Indiegogo or one of these sorts of crowdfunding things. The majority of revenue is raised on the first 1 or 2 days, because the 30 days prior, they're hyping the hell out of the product or brand. And I see too many businesses launch, nobody knows, just dark launch, like, oh, I launched a site. Oh, where was my text message? Where was my, you've got to lean into, you got to hustle. Some of the best online businesses, they're hustlers. They started at the markets. They started out of their garage. They started by bugging their family and friends on WhatsApp. You still got to do that. I mean, you're paying $1, $2, $3 a click through paid marketing channels. Well, do what you can for free. And that sort of growth hacking, people are getting lazy. You got to go back to that, and you got to never forget the hustle, because that's where the good operators have come from.
So back to the 50-30-20 rule.
Yeah.
And then we can because I do love what you're saying, and I completely understand it. And so the marketing spend that we're talking about is actually coming out of the operating costs. Is that factored into that?
Yeah. So some people put that as your as part of your cost of sales. Typically, I don't see that in accounting in ecom. So yeah, your marketing would be, if I'm talking about 30% operating expenses, your marketing and your wages are the two biggest items that'll fall within that category. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And so obviously, the bigger that you get your gross margin, the more room you've got on the other side to scale out. So when you're talking about your operating and your marketing expenses, that basically means, if my gross margins are 60% or 70%, it usually means I'm going to be able to spend a lot more to acquire a customer. And
exactly right. And the best businesses that I work with who are turning over good money, but more importantly, putting the most money in their pocket, are businesses with a gross margin of over 50%. So what does that mean when you're looking at, remembering gross margin includes merchant fees, cost of sale, outbound freight, Oz Post or whatever. So what does that mean when you're sourcing a product? You've got to aim for a 70% margin on when you're sourcing. So when you're talking to your factories or you're scouring Alibaba or doing what you're doing, you should be aiming for a 70% margin landed. So if I land this for X, I've got to make a 70% margin when I sell it. And then after you add the freight and the cost of sales and stuff, then it'll come down to 50. But when you're doing your negotiations, crunch your numbers on X GST, 70%. Now the catch there is that if you're selling a brand, like if you're selling alcohol brands or you're a middleman, you'll never get that margin. So I was speaking specifically here to people who are like, oh, I want to go to China and start a brand. So if you're starting a brand, 70% margin on your products, 50% margin on your GP, and if it's a decent product, you've got a good shot. But if you're coming in with a gross margin of under 50 or a product margin that's like 55, I'd have serious concerns about the longevity of that brand in a pretty competitive market.
So it's really interesting. Like that for me is the most important thing in any business, even in a service-based business. Like that's kind of where I come from. Is in service, you same thing. Like it's how do you get your gross margins to 60% minimum, And that's, everything factored into producing the revenue in the service. And then same thing. But I love that you kind of, and I mean, look, if that's in the book, that's the reason. That's one reason that probably out of a bazillion that you're going to go and buy it, because if you can get that right, it just makes your life so much easier. And I think the thing that I learned was like, it is so hard to reverse that the deeper you get into the business as well.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. And you made a good point earlier when you said that what does that gross margin mean? Well, the higher your gross margin, the more you can spend to attract customers, to acquire customers. What does that mean? You grow faster, you scale quicker. So gross margin is the most important metric in e-commerce and probably the least talked about.
Can we talk about the other side of gross margin then as well, which is price and understanding pricing, but more importantly, how do you demand? So I mean, look, it's an interesting dynamic to understand these relationships. But I would imagine that when you're sourcing a product, you then obviously you go, okay, well, how do I get to that 70%? And I'd love for you to talk about, I guess, the marketing side of it as well, and the branding side of it as well, and how that plays into potentially getting you that 70% if it can't be done, based on market dynamics and the product.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because I might have my 70% product and the retail price that is spat out of my calculations is not competitive. Now that is also not advisable. So the magic kind of balance is, I want my 70% margin, but my retail price still has to be competitive. Not cheap, but competitive. And so how do we... and firstly, I would steer away from products that are price-driven for the most part for a startup. So if you're coming in saying, I'm going to do dog beds and there's 1 million of them on Amazon, you'll just never win. You'll never win at that game. So it does also talk to the importance of finding a niche. And some of my best clients have these crazy niches. Kids toys that help them sleep, or bizarre things. Just they've found something. It's this morning I was speaking to non-alcoholic spirits company, and just find your niche. Really important. That makes everything easier. But if you do want to try and get a little bit of wiggle room in your margin and price on the higher side, what you got to do is build a moat around your brand or your product. And I think I'm not interested in really selling commodities like, here's a t-shirt, or here's a dress, or here's a pen, or here's a bottle. You've got to sell a story and a brand. And I think building a brand is hard. So essentially, if you go into e-commerce, you probably got 2 jobs if you're creating a brand. Create an e-commerce business and create a brand. And by the way, there's not many people that are good at both. So I often see great brand people come in and they've just butchered their margins, and you're like, you just need to work on the business side. And on the other side, you see some corporates who might have other businesses go into e-com and just chuck anything on the site and very, very no identity. That doesn't work either. So it's finding that balance. But building that community, I think, and that's part of the moat, or, that protects your brand, to say, well, nobody can attack me because I've got X, Y, and Z. And a great example of that is one that I mentioned to you earlier offline, which is G'd Up Clothing. They've built a community that is untouchable, and they talk the talk. They understand their customer. There's other streetwear brands out there, but these guys understand. They live and breathe their community. They are their community, and they cater to their community. They listen, and the sales are reflective. They'll drop a product and it's sold out in a couple of hours. And it's a nice product. It is, but it's a great brand, and you can't fake that. That's very, very difficult to build, but it's worth the time and the investment. And
so the word moat, right? Just for those who don't it kind of as a theory, you kind of understand it. We're protecting our brand.
Yeah.
What are some examples of moats? So is it could it be anything? Is it as simple as saying, well, what can we do that our competition can't or are not willing to, or is there specific ones that you kind of see that happen regularly?
Well, building a moat, and for those that don't know, a moat is a pool of water that goes around a castle.
Yeah.
So you can't get in. And that's what's protecting your brand. And it's your value proposition, I suppose. And it can go across different things. So I just spoke about G'd Up, and I think their community is their mode, and the fact that it's impossible to copy. I think for other businesses, like Drummer Boy, who's a non-alcoholic spirits company that I'm a shareholder of. Give them a check out. They're pretty cool. But again, trying to position themselves as an early mover in non-alcoholic spirits. So that their moat is we're one of the first to do it, and they're making it in Sydney and all that sort of stuff in a distillery. But let's think about the Iconic. They're selling every brand under the sun. So you sort of think, well, there's no moat there. You can get that stuff in DJs, you can get it in you can get it anywhere. But the logistics experience is incredible. And so they've built a business and so has Amazon. So your moat could be your logistics experience. So there's many opportunities for businesses to double down and protect their brand.
And in my experience as well, the moat, like building a moat necessarily isn't just one thing. It may be one thing at that one point in time, but normally you look at Amazon, right, and they're probably the best moat builder, if we call it a moat builder, the best moat builders of all time, because they just keep doing things to kind of create the flywheel and keep it going. But in my experience, it's always a few things or a different thing at a different point in time based on the way the market moves. Because you said it before, like you probably don't want to be stuck selling a commodity. And at some point, everything gets commoditized, right? Like, Davey Fogarty, the Udi and the success that kind of happened there. But I think, you already see people are coming in and trying to rip that off and so on. So I think it's a good example of how nearly everything gets commoditized. And if you're first, that's great. Probably means you found product market fit, you've entered the right market. But
totally, Dave is a good example. But and it's like, how do you find it? Like, and you're right. It's a series of different solutions for the customer, and it could be a series of different moments. It could be your customer service is faster than everybody else's. It could be, you're Adore Beauties who send the Tim Tams out with the pack. You can find multiple moments that all add to the experience, and that's an interesting idea in itself. That customer experience isn't like, we've got a fast website. In my opinion, customer experience is made up of a series of memorable moments. That could be your packaging. Your packaging could be better. Your delivery could be faster. Your customer service could be on video instead of on live chat. Whatever. That's where people need to be creative and say, what am I doing that others aren't? Like, why would people come back to me? And that's a question that I challenge to businesses that I think are also maybe not quite ready to scale. You say, but I can get that elsewhere. Like, why would I come back to you? And the answer that always comes back, and I made this mistake, it often comes back. I made this mistake earlier to say, but my products are good at a slightly better price. Better quality and better price. I'm like, that makes me think about when I started my shoes, and I was like, they're a better quality and a better price. And I was like, that's a bit of a cop out, and everyone says that. It needs to go beyond that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, we're in a startup now, so I'm thinking these things are all things that I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks. But I'd love for you to. We're obviously we're into the conversation, and I'd love for you to keep in mind everything that we've talked about so far. But what goes into creating a great product, and especially in 2022. So, you talked about something, in the form of packaging, right? And when you've done business for a bit, you kind of start to understand how you can have these different elements that really form the product. So could you talk about that and what makes a great product?
Yeah, packaging is a good one because you think about koala mattresses, the bed in a box, and so that can actually be one of those memorable moments that help with the overall experience and therefore build the moat. I think they've actually started putting music in the box or something. So again, always moving, trying to find things. There's a part of my book in this as well is like, how do you find a trending product? How do you find the right product for you? Really hard, and I think there's basic tips like, check your Google Trends and things like that. Check Amazon, check Alibaba. There's tools that I talk about there to see if a product is on the up or on the down. And I use the example in my book of like, what you would buy, what you would import is Apple Watch straps. They're going really well, and you can sell tons of those. We used to sell those at the Horse, and got other clients that were going great. What you wouldn't buy is DVDs. You wouldn't or DVD players. So it's starting with just the supply and demand check, and then I think it's really avoiding the temptation to be generic. And there's enough Shopos, there's enough Princess Pollys, there's enough of those. That's a hard slog. So I think you've got to really identify something that is trending, that there's got to be reasonable search demand for it. Like, I'm not going to buy, trousers for my dog. It's got to be like, yeah, people want this, and that might be keyword research as well that you can do. And then you've got to think, okay, this space is not being swallowed up by all the behemoths out there. There's a bit of an entry. You could use tools like Ibis World to look at the size of your market size and the growth and who are the big players. And then it's really getting into the nitty gritty and making sure that if you've got a niche product, making sure that the quality is outstanding, that it lasts, that people will talk about it. We want them to come back. Not a bad idea to get a product that depletes or follows through a journey. For instance, if I'm doing kids' lunchboxes, what do they take to daycare? Then what do they take to preschool? Then what do they take to big school? So the lifetime value is an important metric when thinking about your product. And so you might have a great product, but if it lasts your whole life, well, that's great, but they'll never come back to you.
Yeah.
So you've also got to think about, how can I get them back? Like, let's say you're in the pet space. If I've got the dog lead, do I get the collar and then the shampoo and then so it's when you're thinking about your first product, you've got to think about your second and your third and your fourth, because repurchase rate is super critical. And then your packaging as well. And that, again, is part of the experience. So it's like, okay, when the customer gets their delivery, that's one of the greatest moments of the week. Australia Post are there, or whoever it is knocking on your door, and you've got a delivery. That's how it starts. And the good brands out there, they'll post on, you'll see customers post about that experience. So it is following that end-to-end journey. But creating that product, my advice would be, don't do what everyone else is doing unless you've got millions of dollars in your pocket and you're prepared to go into a bidding war on paid media. Find a niche, and it might be one that you've got experience in. Find a niche that solves a problem, and don't start till you found it. Don't chuck on 3 SKUs. It's not going to work. Rarely does 3 SKUs work. There are some businesses out there where 3 or 4 or 5 SKUs, and by SKUs I mean products, rarely do they work. So most of the time I'm encouraging retailers to just pump the brakes on the spending of paid media and give me a range of 40, 50, 60 SKUs. And I'm deliberately posing those challenges to make them go back and realize that I'm actually starting a serious business. I'm not going to chuck a yo-yo online and make $20 million.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Like, I think the biggest thing that I got there was like, you also mentioned it before, but like the idea of, if something's already had its boom, or it's everywhere, you're more than likely going to struggle to break into the market. But the idea of keeping an eye on what's around you, seeing is there a need for this, it's interesting. Like, we've had a lot of people on the podcast, but like, good friend of mine, Tim Hanley, started a clothing label called Frontrunner, did oversized t-shirts, and he's tall, like he's massive, and he did oversized unisex.
He's found his niche.
But t-shirts, like he does sell other stuff, but the t-shirts have just gone absolutely bananas.
He's solving a problem. I imagine, like, big guy probably buying things that don't look great, and he probably wanted a good looking t-shirt that fit well.
Well, nothing's oversized when you're 6'5". That was kind of his thing, right? But the idea was he kind of seen that need there, and that was the basis. And he's expanded into other products and stuff. But I think like the idea of being curious and keeping an eye on things and being able to say, oh, well, why hasn't anyone done that yet? But more importantly, what you mentioned was like the research that goes into that. It's like, okay, well, I had a friend call me and he goes, it was actually Tim. It was actually Tim. Like, if you've met him, you'd laugh. But he called me. He goes, mate, front runner's going in the bin. He goes, I got the best idea ever. He goes, what is it? I go, what is it? And he goes, well, I was at the park and I seen the dogs running around, and I thought, I'd love to look after those dogs. And he goes, Airbnb for dogs. And I go, mate, it's been done.
It's been done. you break his heart.
The first thing he's coming to me is like, funding, where are we going? How are we doing this? And I go, he goes, all right, front runner it is.
Back to front runner. But that's a really good example, because you're like, oh, t-shirts, but oversized t-shirts for big fellas. That's a niche, and that I would give that a big tick of approval, because it's solving a problem. And I just go back to that, like, what problem are you solving? And that's not to say that there can't ever be another Princess Polly, sure, but it takes a lot of capital.
It doesn't have to be the world's biggest problem either. I think that
Yeah.
can kind of stop people as well. Like, you don't need to solve the big problems all the time, even though, like, because media, you got Elon Musk, you got Bezos, you got the big dogs kind of doing their thing. But the idea is that if you can just find even just like a corner of the market, and really capture that corner. So you could be selling a product, but it can even be like who you sell it to that can be that differentiating factor.
Oh, 100%. Yes, I get exposure to a lot of wacky ideas, and the wackier the better for me, because I'm always looking for the niche that's been carved out. Riff Raff and Co. Great, Emma there in Queensland and has started a great business. She's got a couple of kids. What is it? It's a toy that replicates the sound of being in the mother's womb, and it pacifies the kids.
Wow.
Now that's a captive audience, and it solves a problem. Getting your kids to sleep makes perfect sense. Great business, great product, simple, and it's just, again, it's like when you have that aha moment, I've got it. Unfortunately, Tim didn't get it with the dog Airbnb, but at some point he did with Frontrunner, and that's the thing. It's like, I've got to, wake up in the middle of the night, and as I call it in the book, that eureka moment, like I know I've got it. It's not even a question. Like, it's not would this work? It's like, nah, I've got it. I've got the one. That's the moment.
Yeah, and and you can feel it while you're doing it too. Like when you're picking up momentum and you see the same. I mean, I come from service, so with me, I'm dealing with people a lot of the time. So, but you can you see the same problem coming to you all the time, and you can also feel that it's catching fire. And I think ecom would be a little bit different in the terms that you'd probably just see the numbers going bananas, or you might see a spike here, and then you can kind of follow that trend.
That's true. I mean, you can sort of, when I do a lot of business audits, and you come in and you sort of get under the hood and you have a look at a business, and I don't even need to see the sales, really. I just look at other metrics like conversion rate and repurchase rate and net promoter, and there's a few indicators, and you're like, this is something. And that's a lot of fun finding those, and that's also why I invest in businesses, because I'm like, I can see those metrics. That's the beauty of e-commerce. You can see when it's resonating and when it's going, and you can sort of double down and go for it.
Guys, if you're loving this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, give us a tag, or even take a photo if you're watching it. Help spread the love. It helps us out dramatically. I just wanted to take a little bit of your time to say thank you to our major sponsors, BizCover. They are powering the podcast currently. They are the reason we get to travel and have all the amazing guests on. But they're also a really amazing company. They're a business insurer that are insuring Australians all over the country and making sure that if something does go wrong in their business, it's not painful and it's not deadly. If you're an e-commerce business, having insurance is really, really important, because anything that goes wrong with your product and you are liable, and with the way the economy is currently, and manufacturing and shipping and all of these things, and potentially stock going missing, just having your business covered could save you a lot of pain. So if you're interested in getting a quote, it's super easy. It only takes, you can get insured in under 10 minutes and there's no paperwork involved. Their link is in the show notes. Go check it out and get yourself a better deal. Okay, so that's a winning product, and that kind of gives us a bit of an understanding there. I guess the next place that I think would be a good kind of place to go for the conversation would be, what's the process of actually launching a successful e-commerce business? So from more of a macro perspective, obviously finding your winning product, getting your margins and so on to the right place. But if you were going into a business and a new business and advising someone, and maybe they hadn't started it, they just had an idea, or even if you were starting your own, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I write about that in my books, and I'm not just plugging my own book here or my upcoming course, but it's do the homework, and a lot of people don't. So a lot of people jump straight in, and I've got a quiz in here in my book. I say, if you know the answer to these 10 questions, you're ready to rock and roll. If you're not, don't start. Yeah. I'm not afraid to say that. Don't start. So the example there is that I always use is, if I can go and find the timing belt in my car, I shouldn't change it, because I'm not a mechanic. And you've got to, I respect that trade. I know that they know what they're doing. And if you're selling anything online, let's say you're selling women's clothes online, you're not in fashion, you're in e-commerce. You've got to learn the trade. So do your homework, do a course, watch YouTube videos, read the book, all that sort of stuff. Do your homework, then come into it. And then I think it's like any business, it's the planning phase. So a lot of new businesses fail, 1 in 5 in the first year. And so we're not exempt from that in e-commerce. I reckon the rates will be higher in e-commerce because people think it's easier than it is. So it's really understanding, the funding firstly is super critical. Right, how much money do you need to run this business? Now, most startups can't tell me that. You need to know that. Like, you absolutely do. You need to know, like, are you going to lose money for 6 months? And by the way, that's okay. Like, plenty of good businesses start by losing money. But it's just knowing how long your cash runway is, when you become profitable. It's, okay, what am I targeting? I still work with businesses doing $50 million a year who don't have a budget. They don't know what they're going to make in the next 3 months, month by month. They'll have a rough idea, but you can't plan that way. E-commerce is all about ratios. I want to spend 15% of my marketing on my predicted revenue on marketing. When I buy my stock, I'm buying it towards my next 3 months planned sales. If you don't know your plan, you can't run a good business. You really can't. And so it's doing the plan. And once you've got the plan, you start sourcing the product. Once you've found your supplier, you've got to work out the logistics. Do I sea freight it? Do I air freight it? What do I do? Bring that in. How am I going to store it? How am I going to distribute it? All that stuff has to be worked out. In addition to, okay, pick the platform, picking Shopify, pick the right plan, design the right theme, what functions. I need a wish list. I need a good menu, whatever it is. Get the site. Okay, I've got my 15% for marketing. What are my channels? Am I TikTok? Am I Facebook? Am I SEO? Am I your channel plan? Get your channel plan right. Your email marketing strategy. How are you going to bring your customers back? And then you can kind of work out how to scale after that.
I want to go back to, I think, a really, really good point. And it's interesting because I feel like 99% of people wouldn't do it this way. But you talked about planning first, then finding your product. And so I'm guessing your 10 questions in the book would if you answer those, you can take the next step. So read the book. But the idea of, and when you say planning, you're talking about, how much funding do I have to put into this?
Yeah.
But over a longer period of time. So a lot of people go, just how much money do I have to get my first lot of stock, but more importantly, if I'm purchasing all this stock, how much do I need to sell to be able to make sure that I can get my second, 100%. Lot of stock in and keep that flow? Because a lot of people go try to find this product. And I think the other thing I wanted to ask you, is it something that you see often is like people are trying to find a problem for their product rather than finding a product to solve the problem? Yeah. Both of those things. I know that was kind of two questions and two kind of topics.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I mean, what you've said there is super important. Okay, great. I've bought my first round of stock. Typically, I'd recommend you hold about 12 weeks cover. That means enough stock to last you 12 weeks. So what happens there? If you're importing from China, 6 weeks in, you've got to place the next order. So, okay, have you got the planning? Have you got the cash for that? And another good one is simply the 50-30-20 rule. Like, does your business plan meet that? And a lot of businesses that I see, they'll say, yeah, look, I don't have the margin covered. Like, I'm on a 40% margin, but I'm not paying wages, and I don't have rent, so that's fine. Yeah, but one day you want to, so you've got to build that all out now, so that one day you can pay wages. And you know how many founders I see who aren't, I'm talking about, again, 20, 30, 40, $50 million a year businesses. The founders are living on tins of tuna because they haven't done that foundational work to make sure that as my revenue grows, I've allocated 9% to wages from day one, even if that was $100 on day one. So making sure that you have a wage budget that scales as a percentage of revenue, making sure that you have a spot on your P&L in that 30% OPEX for rent, even if you don't have the office. One day you're going to have it. Now, it's better to have it allocated rather than just be like, oh, so I need some wages now, that's when you get into all sorts. So it's build it now for when it is 20 million, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, because like a $300,000 business in revenue, you're going, okay, well, 30% OPEX, and then you've got wages, and then you go, okay, well now I've got to go find, or I can't increase my OPEX by 10% because then it puts everything else out and I need to get this lease. And you end up trying to take percentages from different areas. And that is a massive, massive problem.
Well, that's what happens. So I'm running my business on 30%, Paul, but I don't pay a wage, but I'm going to start paying a wage. Cool. You're going to start losing money.
How many CEOs do you see? Or let's talk about the smaller scale of businesses, right? How many businesses don't have their CEO isn't getting paid yet because at some point they haven't included that in their OPEX?
Oh, I could name and shame plenty, big and small.
Yeah.
And that's what, my saying to them, and I've got no problem saying this, is do you want to eat tuna or do you want to eat lobster? What's going on? Your e-commerce business has to be there to improve your life. I fundamentally don't understand, if you're not getting paid and paid well as your business grows, how you're improving your life. And that's a really common problem that I come across.
It's the age-old problem of not having, the 5 and 10 year plan, and the reason you start a business, and kind of understanding, okay, what do I actually want out of this? Not just building something that ends up turning my life and to be honest, I've done that, where you kind of you're in no man's land, and then you kind of have to, okay, well, I have to figure something out, and so it's easy for me to sit here and giggle about this stuff now, but I once went through it, so I understand what you're saying. And I think then one of my questions was going to be what don't people know about e-commerce that you think holds them back? Is it what you're talking about in the form of unit economics and truly understanding that side of it, and the planning, that a lot of founders don't probably do?
There's a lot of things that people don't understand about e-commerce that probably come as a rude shock. The unit economics, the lack of financial knowledge is the main reason that e-commerce businesses fail. And that's a shame, because some of them fail with really good products or really good brands, and they just don't get it. And they should have taken the time to learn, because if I can learn, anyone can. And there's a lot. I mean, also just the fact that e-commerce is not just opening up a shop and putting products on. It's a serious business. It's as serious as any business out there. And it's hard. It's hard. But if you're prepared to do the hard work, there are still success stories out there that, started with $1 and sold for 30 million. I come across them all the time. But the common theme with those people is they're generally good in the numbers. That's a really strong theme for me. The founders that I talk to had big exits, or they're turning over big money but big profit. Generally, they're either really good in the numbers, or their partner is, or they've got someone in who is really, really solid in the numbers. The numbers drives everything in e-commerce. Absolutely. One of my bugbears is when an agency, and I've got an agency, so I'm speaking with agency hat on here. Ecom Nation is the agency, by the way. Those agencies that say, I can give you a better ROAS, and they haven't looked at your margins, they haven't looked at your ops, they haven't looked at anything else, and it's no, you can't. And I see it. I work with clients who are using an agency and getting a Facebook return on ad spend of 10 times. That same agency for another client will be getting 1.4 times using the same strategy. So agencies have to realize it's not all about you. It's the product that's driving. Honestly, if you've got a red hot product and red hot branding and creative, any mug can get you a good ROAS. And I say that as somebody from an agency that has an agency. So it's product and brand and all the things that you do, not all the things your agency does.
And so now we kind of fast forward, and I want to go to the point. Let's say the planning's been done, we've put in the work, we've got the unit economics right, we've got the 50-30-20 rule. We've nailed it. We've found product market fit a little bit, and we're 1 year in. Maybe let's say 1 to 2 years in. What's next?
Scale. So let's say that we're achieving. So success for me 1 year in, honestly, is that you're achieving your 50-30-20 or close enough. I don't mind if that becomes 50-35-15. That's fine. If it's growing, you can even go a little bit less on the profit. As long as you're in control of that and you're choosing those ratios, and you're in control, that's fine. You can adjust those ratios.
But the gross is a non-negotiable?
Gross is a non-negotiable.
Yep.
Yeah. You can change your ratios on how much you spend. And, look, I'm going to go a bit harder on my marketing. I'm going to spend 20%, but I'm going pretty well. So I'm happy, therefore, to make 15% profit instead of 20%. But it's 15% of a larger pie, but I'm in control. I've made that decision consciously. So if we're hitting those numbers, and then the other big test that I put to all businesses is, do you have a financial model, like month to month? This is my P&L. This is how it should look. And have you proven that for 3 months in a row, and it's within 5% accuracy? And within 5% accuracy on sales and expenses. They're the two big 12-month ticks that I'm looking for before making the decision to scale.
And so when you talk, that's your money models, right? That's your percentage of revenues, and you're going, okay, I mean, 50, 30, 20, but I'm sure there's even some even deeper details there within your op and your marketing and so on. But so you're saying that you need to be able to test yourself against those numbers and prove that you can actually hit them and have the discipline to do so.
Yeah, you can't scale without that, because like what I do in my job is people come along and they say, how do I grow? And I'll look at those numbers and I'll say, you can't grow, or you're hitting 50, 30, 20 or whatever it might be. You're hitting the metrics that I think are suitable. Now we're gonna put your model under the stress test. So what I'll do is I'll build them a model that ramps up using using sort of key principles around 9% of wages, 3% on merchant fees. I'll build that model out for them, and then I'll make some assumptions like sell-through rates on inventory, ROAS, like overall marketing efficiency ratio, which is how much money do I need to spend on marketing. In other words, if I spend $1, do I make $5? Cool. I'm going to put that under the stress test next month and go a little bit higher. Oh, you know what? We proved it again. We made $300,000 this month, and we spent 25 on marketing. So whatever, we spent our 20% on marketing. So I'm trying to stress test that model upwards until it breaks. But I don't wait till the end of the month to see that it's broken and be like, oh, whoops, we lost a lot of money. So I build a model that monitors that every single day. So how often do I look at my numbers? Every single day in detail. And if it's going well and I'm getting a better return on investment, and in other words, I'm more profitable this week than my budget allows for, go for it. I dial it up. I've had a great time doing that. You crank it up. There's no going wrong. You crank it up until it breaks. And it's just knowing where the break point is. Oops, my marketing's gone over. Stop there, stop. But if you're setting that up daily and monitoring daily, you can dial it up and down as needed. That's the beauty of e-commerce. It's scalable, and you can also pull it back quickly.
Yeah, I love it. And so when you're dialing up the marketing spend, that's obviously literally the first cog in the process. So you'll see, okay, if I'm putting $1 in and I used to get 5, but when I put it up, now I'm only getting 4. That changes your 50, 30, 20.
Yeah, and that's where I'll pull it back to keep true to my 50, 30, 20. I don't want the revenue. I want to pull back to my 50, 30, 20. But it's also, ensuring that, all right, we're going to dial up our marketing spend. My next question is, what are you doing? What are you doing to support that with your product? Well, that's cool, because we've got our new range. It drops on Tuesday, and we usually do an extra 30% of revenue on Thursday. And then I've got an email going out to lost customers on Friday. And then on socials, we're doing a partnership. So I'm not just here saying, oh, great, like dial up Facebook, off we go. And all the other departments in the business need to be pulling towards sales as much as the marketing department. And going back to that idea, product drives everything. So if we sat down and we were like, this month we're going to go for it. And I'll say, yeah, cool. What's happening this month? Nothing. Well,
we're just going to increase spend by 20%.
That's risky. It might work for a little while, but it's once again, it's product and brand and activations and cool stuff. Brand interest drives everything. As a great example, Budgie Smuggler, right? Interesting brand. Those guys are cool. They get it. They're doing stuff with NRL, AFL, heaps of interesting stuff. And so there's always activity that then the marketing team can go, bang, I'm with you, and you go together, not in isolation.
Almost like generating, you kind of mentioned organic and how important that is, but like generating that organic attention that can then help your paid kind of really get the, it kind of, you're right, you do need to support, with kind of activations and get the team on board, definitely.
The organic's a good point, because you come across businesses that want to ramp up their spend and they hammer the agency. Oh, our ROAS is crap. And then I always give them a little test. Go and check your organic branded searches. Go and check your social media followers. Are they up or down? Oh, they're down. your paid media will be down too. All ships rise with the tide. Absolutely. You're rarely going to see, for instance, like your socials followings down, your organic branded searches in Google are trending down, you're losing email subscribers, but your ROAS is it's a bigger problem. But honestly, a lot of brands don't want to face that problem.
Yeah. And so what does that support look like? Because that's a good question. Like that would be my question, personally. I understand kind of the crux of what you're saying, but like what catches people out, if they are just kind of in that stress test? Like what are some of the things that come up in those stress tests that you do?
Yeah, I think marketing is the big one. Just again, too many people want to just say, I've lost count of the amount of times where clients, we get their ratios under control. We got them spending 15% on marketing and they're pumping out a 20% profit. And, particularly in turnarounds where they've been losing money and then they're profitable and they go, can we spend 25%, this month on marketing? I'm like, yeah, you'll be negative though. You'll take 5% off your profit. It's going back to those old habits. People want to spend their way out of trouble. Whereas I would rather take that money and put it into a good product, to put it into R&D, research and development, and do that sort of stuff. So it probably also looking at sales. Paid media, as my friend Mal Chia will say, paid media is not a strategy. Every department needs a seat at that strategic growth table, and nothing wrong with sitting down once a month, once a week, round the table. Right, customer service. What are you doing this week for us to hit our target? Product. What are you doing this week for us to hit our target? Creative. What do you do? I love that because even operations, we're launching same-day delivery or free returns, or we're going to try free delivery. Every department impacts growth. And under that stress test, again, it's just discipline. And take a leaf out of an athlete's book. It's routine and discipline. If I say spend 9% on wages, there's no ifs or buts. Spend 9% on wages. So if I build those parameters for a business, as a business owner, stay within them. Don't break it. As I say, trust the process. Act with discipline. Be in your numbers. Don't come halfway through the month and not know as a percentage of revenue how much you've actually spent on your marketing. Get in your numbers every single day and act with discipline. Discipline in e-commerce or any business is so important,
Yeah, or otherwise you're driving blind, right?
That's a good.
And you might have success, but you don't know why, and more importantly, it's easy to drive off the road.
Yeah, and I can tell you, if you ever go and sell that business, or you got private equity coming, you'll have no answers for them. Then they'll be asking all those questions, and you'll get found out at some point.
Read the book. Look, if this conversation, just what we've just had, then I love it. That's the stuff that I've spent a lot of time in service trying to understand, and it's very different, but. That is what we just talked about then is business, in my opinion. It's that kind of explains what you need to do. I just want to kind of shift a little bit now and go more into the state of e-commerce right now. So in your words, what's happening in e-commerce and what's the state?
Well,
currently?
There's a bit of a so we've had a great couple of years, with the lockdowns and so on, and we accelerated in e-commerce rapidly. Essentially, it's just come back to where it was pre-pandemic, and where it was pre-pandemic was great. We were having a good time. The issue we will have a lot of retailers go under this year, for sure, because a lot of bad practices were picked up over the last 2 years. So over the last 2 years in e-commerce, any mug could make money. Let's be honest, it wasn't hard. It's harder now, and again, going back to that. There was a lot of active shoppers over the last 2 years. Now it's come back a little bit. It's a little bit hard to get customers. So the businesses that, were set up maybe during that fun time, maybe don't know what it's like to actually go back and, have to do things a little harder and find other ways to grow. And they're the ones that will get found out. And a good example of that is the retailer that said, our business grew 100% last year, but we weren't 100% better business, and that's a great way to sum it up. Businesses grew that otherwise wouldn't or shouldn't. So I think I feel comfortable about where we are because I've been around for a long time, and I'm happy with the direction it's heading in. 20% of total retail. Yep, it'll go up next year. It'll go up the year after. But I do think there'll be a few businesses that are in a bit of trouble. that aren't in control of their growth and their numbers and their value proposition. So I reckon, unfortunately, we'll see a few fall off over the next 12 to 18 months.
So massive spike over the last 2 years, and then it probably comes back to what you've been kind of talking about is if you were disciplined enough and you kind of kept the unit economics and the business operating the way it should, and you didn't get greedy, because you could, you said it, you would have got away with a lot more during that 2 years than what you will now.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is, if you're a founder and you've kind of come out of that and you've had great growth, but you don't have a memory of what it was like before you went through that period, you probably need to kind of, get everything under control right now.
Get a consolidation. We had growth and now it's about consolidation. That's not to say growth can't happen, but a lot of those bad practices have been formed over the last 2 years, and it's just back to basics, and and grow the old-fashioned way. Grow by releasing new categories, by releasing new products, by trying export. There's no tailwind. The wind's gone out of those sails. Like, there's a little bit, but you're not going to grow sitting on your hands. So you got to hustle and do those things I said. It's not spend more on marketing. It's find new countries to export to. One of the best ways for an e-commerce business to grow is through product and category expansion. If you've got a category that's performing well, can you do a subcategory in it? How can you expand that category? How can you get your buying better? How can you get your replenishing going strong? Can you go into new products? They're all the ways that since the dawn of time businesses have grown, and it's just going back to those basics. It's just forget about that tailwind. It's gone.
What about in store and I've been having some conversations with just friends that own businesses, and they've seen obviously the big spike and they're coming on the back end. And what about kind of getting back into store? And if you have started a company in that, is that obviously, and then just to kind of further that, the strategic side of where we are currently, on the back end of that big spike, what are some of the things you're seeing, and what do you, I don't know how you feel about predictions, but what do you think the next, say, 12 months to 5 years looks like?
Yeah, I think next 12 months to 5 years will be fine. Just steady growth, back to the way it was, a couple of % a year or whatever. I certainly think at some point e-commerce will end up 50-50 with physical retail. Why wouldn't it? We're in the early days and it's already at 20%. Imagine how good it'll be in augmented reality or video, or imagine all the deliveries will get faster.
Yeah, delivery.
Of course, it's we've got refunded now, which is like you get refunded before you even post the goods back as a consumer. Like, come on, it's incredible. It's too easy for us to shop now. So you've got to think it's going to be at 50-50. So I think we're in a sweet spot. I don't know if that'll be 5 years, but it'll keep growing. 25% of retail, so it'll keep growing. In a pretty healthy way. I do think it'll be a little bit of a tough 12 months, probably, as people have comping year on years. Last year we did this and this year we're doing what. And that's not a great feeling for everybody. But I think the good businesses will prosper. Life for me was great, before the pandemic. Pandemic was like, oh, cool, that was nice. Things got busy. I wrote a book, but it's like back to where we are now is sweet. It's good for good operators, and bricks and mortar has a place there for sure. I've got clients that have stores. I think the thing about bricks and mortar is if you're going to open stores as an online retailer, you probably expect your online sales to be cannibalized a little bit, probably. And if you're monitoring your marketing spend, that marketing efficiency ratio as a percentage of online revenue, you might find that cops a hit. So you might switch to looking at your marketing efficiency ratio as a percentage of company revenue instead of channel specific revenue. Absolutely fine. Like if you're running digital campaigns and your online sales grow, but your store in Melbourne picks up, that's sweet. You just got to look at it all together, and stores can complement a digital strategy quite nicely. And same as marketplaces, it's fine. You just got to expect a little bit of cannibalization. But if they're in good centres, it could also lower your customer acquisition cost. I've seen that happen as well. Like really strong branded stores, 5 or 6 or 7 stores around the country, can actually have a positive impact on your digital spend, because you got these big billboards basically all over the place. But the usual warnings for bricks and mortar is heavy on capital. 100 grand, 200 grand for a fit out, and then your inventory holdings, and you've got a lot more commitments than you do in e-commerce. You've got your leases and your things like that. So it's just, can they go hand in hand? Yeah, absolutely. There's things you can do in bricks and mortar that you'll never be able to do in e-com. And it's just understanding the balance and the cannibalization, I think.
And I would imagine there'd just be a push and pull relationship in the OPEX side of it.
Yeah. Well, and making sure that's clearly split out on the P&L. So, your Melbourne store, this is the percentage of your wages that go to that store, and, this is the percentage of marketing spend that goes to that store, and making sure that your COGS and your margins are split out on your P&L, so that if there is a problem, you can zero in on, that store is not profitable, or my online sales to New Zealand aren't profitable, or just really getting that very clean P&L. A clean P&L is a thing of beauty. That's something I really enjoy seeing.
It's one of the most important things. You don't want to be sitting down at the end of the month, end of the quarter, to kind of go into your reports and then. What you mean by clean is you want it to represent the way you want to look at the business, not the way your accountant or he should be on the same page or she should be on the same page. But the idea being that looking at something like that and using that as your scorecard on a regular basis is. Yeah. I just don't think. I think it's underestimated how much that can help, and I think especially as a small business owner. Getting good at that kind of stuff is critical.
One of the best things I did was learn or brush up on my financial acumen, but looking at the Xero file is something that I do all the time. It's probably the best data in the business. I look at it alongside Google Analytics and your Shopify Analytics and those sorts of things, and the scorecard is it, because I keep talking about 50, 30, 20. Well, Google Analytics doesn't tell you about that. It's your P&L, so making sure that every month you score yourself on that 50, 30, 20 rule and make sure you're on track.
Love it, mate. Awesome. I could talk about this all day.
I can see your eyes.
I just love it. I mean, it's music. It's music to the ears. But I think it's what catches most people out. Like I know it did with me in the early years, and it's something that it can help you so much. Just getting, especially as a founder. Like you may not have that skill set yet, but don't. Like a lot, you can definitely shy away from it and kind of hide from it when you just kind of confront it.
Yeah, particularly if you're not strong in that stuff. But, my tip for people is, like, you're hearing us talking now about COGS and gross margin and stuff. There's going to be plenty of people here who don't know what gross margin is. No worries. I didn't when I started my business. Go and Google it, and your task for this week is understand it. And if that means breaking out one of these topics a week and Googling the hell out of it, break it down like that. I do that all the time. Like, I'm open to buy, a buying metric for inventory. I'm not comfortable with it. This week, I'm going to read every article I can on open to buy. And why does an open to buy in a retail business matter? I've got to understand the relationship with the balance sheet. What's a balance sheet? Break it down and learn it. Don't feel silly about not knowing it, because that's all of us. But it's just break it down, nail one thing a week, and don't start until you do, because ultimately they could be costly mistakes. So it comes back to, like, do your homework. I wish I had when I started out. I learnt the hard way. So that's why I know how important it is.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. So we're going to dive into the last part of the podcast, which is quickfire. I always have to preface this. Okay. Audience would hate me for it. They would be getting sick of it by now, but it's not quickfire. It's just some random questions that we put together.
Okay.
We can even call it slow fire if you like.
Yeah. Okay.
So don't feel like you have to shorten your answer. Sometimes I say it and then I'll get like a 3-word answer. And
elaborate. Okay.
So one piece of advice for your younger self.
That's a really good one. I think because I as a younger person was, struggling a little bit with certain things, and family and mental health issues and stuff like that. It would be don't sweat the small stuff. And I recently spoke at University of New South Wales, Warren College. There, I was like, I don't give a shit what any of your marks are, anything like that. From the perspective of eternity, none of that matters. And it just also, young person, your start doesn't matter. only look forward. Like, I never look back. I only look forward because I'm in control of what's next, and to a certain extent. So it's just don't sweat the small stuff. As a young person, you got time. You can be successful, and don't compare yourself to everybody else. And I know that's about 6 answers, but it's I guess if I could sum that up, it's like, don't sweat the small stuff and only look forward, not back.
It's such a good answer. I think, like, I look back at, I guess, some of the mistakes that I've made in my life, and I think they all really come from the idea that I didn't have a long enough time horizon. I thought I had to have everything sorted now.
Yeah.
And usually I think that kind of is that when you mentioned your answer, I kind of thought back to that for me, and that's something I've been focusing on now is even, like I'm 29, and so, but I feel like I've got more time now than I did at 24.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
And it's just a shift in perspective of like, well, I've got 10 years to really build something great or work on myself and become the person I want to. Like, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, so I'm 40. I turned 40 this week, and I look at you and I say, oh, mate, you've got so much time ahead of you. And that's what people say to me, whereas sometimes I'm like, oh, I've got to do everything this week, and I haven't done it. I've failed. And it's that word, perspective. And perspective is everything. And I think it's so important.
Love it. So what advice would you have for someone who's just about to start a business?
I think don't start too early. Like, some people say fail first, all that stuff. No, I don't agree with that. I think take the time to master your craft, whatever that craft may be. Like, and we'll use e-commerce because we're talking about it today, but again, I say, like, if I'm selling women's fashion online, I'm not in fashion, I'm in e-commerce. And it's just understanding that. So I'll go back to the point about being a mechanic. I'm not about to go out and start changing the oil and changing the timing belt in my car and so on just because I can access it. Give due respect to the craft, take your time and learn. And I think if I could zero in on an e-commerce merchant who might be starting, if you've got, I'm just going to be a little bit general here and sort of say, if you've got less than 10 products, go back to the drawing board. Think about yourself going into your favorite shop. Let's just say your favorite shop's, I don't know, General Pants or something, clothing shop or Universal Store, whatever. You go in and you see 10 products on the shelf. You're getting out of there pretty quickly. You need to make it busy. Take the time, get the money together, make your store look busy. Your conversion rate will increase. Your chances of success will increase. So take your time to get it right before you start.
I love it. Last one. What's the number one trait that a founder must have for success and why? I know there's not one, but what do you think is the most important?
I think, I can only sort of speak for myself. And when I say for myself, I mean some of the people that I've worked with who are successful founders and myself founding, whatever all the things that I do. I think being prepared, so attention to detail and being prepared. And as part of that, knowing your numbers. I don't care if it's selling books or selling courses or selling clothes. I think knowing your numbers. So on the professional side, knowing your numbers. I think on the personal side, founders need to display humility. And I think when you display humility, people will follow you and go with you and you can lead them into battle. I don't think anyone really likes hearing about the founder who's boasting about the $100 million and so on. So some of the best founders who are leaders, are just good people. And the no dickhead policy. I think that's interesting. I just find a lot of the good business people that I work with are just good people and people that I really like spending time with. And as a result, they tend to attract good staff who lean in and help them. So I think professionally, attention to detail and know the numbers, and as a personal trait and a leadership trait, displaying a bit of humility, particularly as you achieve a bit of success.
I love both of those. I think humility is a really great one, if that makes sense. Like the idea of I think it's always been important, but I think even more so now. Like, I don't know whether it's social media and people getting sick of hearing everyone, blowing their own horn and so on. But I think it's a great one, and I think same thing. Like leaders that even I want to follow and I may not be a part of the company, or you kind of want to be around them, or you find yourself attracted to them more often than not, it's because they are humble, and they know that they're not doing it all themselves, or it's not happening just because of them, and it's usually that they've got good people around them as well.
Yeah, and that ends up being fun, and it's got to be fun, and yeah, I think people gravitate towards those types of people. So yeah, humility is a good one.
Love it. Mate, I want to say a massive thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
That was amazing. Like, I genuinely, I could sit here and talk to you all day.
Same.
I think going into the details, I wanted to go places that we probably don't have enough time to go. But I think the audience, definitely would have got a lot out of that. Where can everyone find you, and more importantly, where does everyone get their hands on the book?
Yeah, the book. Well, I've got the book for you here, Kyle, and
beautiful.
I'll give you that signed copy, which is automatically worth less after I sign it. PaulWaddy.com. Hit me up on the website. I've got learnecommerce.com.au, which is a site that I'm training course I'm working on. It's you can chuck your email in there and get notified if you want to learn more about e-commerce. Or at Paul Waddy e-commerce on LinkedIn or Instagram. Connect with me, drop me a line. I love talking e-com, so drop me a line, and if you've heard something in here that you want to ask me about, I love that stuff. I try and get in there and answer, and that's how we build the community, the e-commerce community, which I'm big on. So get in touch, drop me a line, give us a follow, give us whatever you want, and we'll talk e-com.
And the book is called?
The book is called Shopify for Dummies. So that's on Booktopia, Amazon, Dummies, all those, Angus and Robertson. And then Selling Online for Dummies is coming out early next year. So that's on pre-sale, but you can absolutely get your hot little hands on Shopify for Dummies at the moment. And again, if you do grab it, have a read, and if you like it, reach out. If you don't like it, don't reach out. And happy to talk about the book as well. I just love interacting on all things e-com. So yeah, absolutely get in touch.
No, mate, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I know I'll be getting into that thing and having a good read. But we'll have all the links in the show notes as well. So if you do want to grab a copy and kind of find out more, definitely check it out. But yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And Joshy boy, thanks for putting this together. And to our audience, a massive thank you for all the support. Again, we don't get to do this without you guys. So a massive thank you, and we'll see you guys next week.